country from the illegal alien drug dealers, robbers, murderers, gang members, and child predators. And we will make America safe again.
The inauguration of the 47th President of the United States, Donald Trump, is supposed to also mean rapid changes for the broken immigration system in the United States. I'm Jamie Virgen in San Antonio, Texas, for a new edition of Immigration Crisis, the Fight for the Southern Border. The president-elect visited the valley a few weeks ago to watch another SpaceX rocket launch. But it was the visit from his Border Czar, Tom Homan, with the Texas governor, Greg Abbott, that gave us more of a picture of what is being planned by the incoming administration when it comes to mass deportations after the inauguration on January 20th. The reality, as we have reported the last few months, is that the number of encounters at the border in the Del Rio area of operation for Border Patrol is actually down to about 250 to 300 migrants a day compared to over 1,000 at this time last year, a number that has significantly gone down, according to some with Border Patrol, due to the efforts of the Mexican government to return migrants to their border with Guatemala. During that visit to Eagle Pass, Homan and the governor fed the troops, National Guard members, and DPS troopers that are working down on the border as part of Texas's response to the number of migrants that have been coming into the United States through the border without a legal pathway. Members of Operation Lone Star. This is some of what they had to say during that visit.
You need to know the gratitude that I, my fellow Texans, and your fellow Americans have for you, for what you're doing, and what you continue to do.
You can't have strong national security if you don't have border security. We need to know who's coming in, what's coming in, and where's coming in, why it's coming, all those questions.
The state's attempts to keep the border safe have included adding more concertina wire along certain parts of the border, adding what the head of the Texas Military Department and the recently retired head of the Texas Department of Public Safety said were pepper ball launchers. Major General Thomas Swelser and Steve McGraw explained how they would be used during a Senate Border Security Committee meeting in Austin back in June. Both men were directly asked about the use of pepper ball launchers, and this is what he had to say about their policy when asked by Senator Cesar Blanco.
Obviously, we saw reports of National Guard members utilizing pepper bullets on the border as a deterrent for migrants who intend on crossing. Understanding that, as we saw in El Paso, some of those folks were pretty violent towards our National Guardmen, and then some weren't, right? Some were families just trying to get across as well. Can you talk a little bit about the department's policy as it pertains to non-lethal use of force to deter people from crossing between ports of entry? Understanding that if some of these folks are becoming violent, of course we've got to ensure that they're not and that they're deterred, but there are also kids and women and children that are crossing, and we don't want them to get caught in the line of fire there. So can you walk us a little bit through the use of force?
Yes. So for Texas Military Department, force may be used for self-defense or in defense of others. And that force must be the minimum level prescribed by the situation and proportional to the situation. So as the situation presents itself, you would first try to do a show of force, meaning I'm here, I look like a police officer or a soldier. Fencing can be a show of force, clearly showing that there's an authority here and you're not supposed to be coming here. The next level up would be verbal persuasion, saying, please stop. You'll see a lot of pictures of our soldiers pointing, like, you must go to the port of entry. This is an illegal, this is an illegal crossing, go to a port of entry. So those would be verbal types of and signal cues. And then as that escalates, you'd get into more physical techniques of open hand, like they're pushing you, you're just trying to maintain what you're doing. And that's the scale where you start to get into the non-lethal or what's called less than lethal uses. That beyond that would progress into an escalation of force, which we call deadly force. So in the case, as you mentioned, the people crossing are becoming more violent. I think the cartels are putting a lot of pressure on them to cross. Sometimes when they don't want to cross here, the cartels tell them, you better cross or, we'll kill you, and don't come back. And so we're seeing more incidents of aggression. Just last week, had a soldier bit on the leg. He was walking, a migrant apprehended them, and they bit him in the leg. A week before, migrant overwhelmed, or soldier, not overwhelmed, but attempted to, elbowing him in the face multiple times. So we needed a gap filler between saying don't do anything and deadly force, because we don't want to get there. But we do have to maintain the security of our border. So the less than lethal, the way it's used in practice is those rounds are used for area saturation. So we train our soldiers to hit an inanimate object in the proximity of the person that you're trying to turn around, so that the pepper ball ruptures and the pepper material sprays out. So oftentimes, if you'll see in a video, you'll see multiple, like, fire, boom, 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 boom. What they're doing is trying to hit the fence around these folks so that the pepper disperses. We specifically train them, do not shoot directly at an individual, because if hit in the wrong place, it can cause serious bodily injury. So,
they're not targeting migrants. They're targeting, those that are on the front line. Okay, the TDA members that are cutting through the wire, after been told that put them in a position just trying to maintain order. But to the general's point, the dynamic resistance models, best practices for use of force, and we've been working very closely so they understand the intricacies in terms of when you've been empowered to make arrests or use force in that regard. It's very complicated and very important that we restrain and have a way that soldiers and troopers and agents and officers know what they can do and what they can't do.
Yeah, thank you for that. So TMD is using pepper bullets.
Pepper balls.
Pepper
it's
balls.
A big difference, yes, sir.
Okay. What's the difference?
Well, one implies it's a bullet that hits and strikes, okay, which has been used, plastic bullets, and been used in riot situations. The one is, as the general did a good job of explaining, it really is just, it's pepper, okay, and you don't aim it at an individual, you saturate an area. So they're shooting into the fence low, always lower extremity into the fence in that regard where they're at, and you can have the impact, okay, an impact in terms of deterring them from cutting through at that point in time. No one wants to be around that pepper spray, and it's been very successful. And when we've deployed it in that area and been able to prevent people from cutting through and creating the same type of riot situation you saw at Gate 36.
Yeah. Okay, so the ball, I guess, it explodes.
Yeah, exactly. And to the general's point, you're not aiming at people, you're aiming at a target on the ground, into the fencing, right at the lower level in that regard. And they're trained that way to do it because it is less than lethal, but it is a force. Yeah. It is a use of force.
Yeah. And are we doing this are we doing this once they've already crossed the international boundary, or is it in anticipation of the crossing? At what point are they authorized to use it?
It is primarily used to stop a breaching of the barrier. So there's already been an illegal crossing. People are now crawling through the concertina wire field, and we're saying go back, and they're not doing it. And now they're approaching the anti-climb barrier. So now there's non-compliance.
So it's utilized after non-compliance, not in advance of non-compliance. It's not to prevent non-compliance.
That's correct. Yeah. So again, if
We've used it when they've been cutting through at that point. When it's obvious the guide, the leader of that particular group is orchestrating this, and they're there using a technique that's used by TDA, at that point in time, they're the targets, not the migrants. The migrants are back waiting for that hole to be created that they can rush through.
But contrary to the testimony given, we obtained video of migrants being targeted by soldiers, migrants which included babies and toddlers. What you're about to hear is the report I filed back on November 26. The Rio Grande, the final obstacle to a long journey. Protecting the border is a job the state of Texas has now taken on. And the ways they slow down the flow of migrants includes the use of what is known as pepper ball launchers.
we needed a gap filler between saying don't do anything and deadly force, because we don't want to get there. But we do have to maintain the security of our border.
The pepper ball launchers shoot a ball-like munition that has a chemical that is like tear gas. And despite what the head of the Texas Department of Public Safety said during that committee meeting in June,
They're not targeting migrants. They're targeting, those that are on the front line, the TDA members that are cutting through the wire.
that is not true, as you're about to see. The migrants in these videos were not cutting the concertina wire. Some were carrying toddlers, one woman was pregnant, and here you see another woman carrying a baby. The migrants come up to the gate of the boat ramp. That's when a uniformed person shoots at the ground, so the pepper ball's chemical spreads towards the group. At that point, you hear screaming that a baby cannot breathe. The migrants walk away, putting water on the children's faces. The group then walks closer to the bridge. And once again here, you see the uniformed troops on top of the train carts shooting towards the woman carrying the baby, men with toddlers on their shoulders, and the children walking in the river. Again, this is not the way the head of the Texas Military Department and the head of DPS said the pepper ball launchers would be used back in June.
We specifically trained them, do not shoot directly at an individual, because if hit in the wrong place, it can cause serious bodily injury.
We asked a law enforcement expert what these pepper ball launchers should be used for.
It's a tool, an extended range impact munition that can be used from a distance, this particular one up to 150 feet.
Terry Nichols is a retired chief of police in Texas. He says these launchers are meant to redirect by causing discomfort so that the person or group can be redirected or moved from a certain area. But is this the tool to use with groups that include children?
It's too young. Again, we have to think broader about what other technologies are available to us that we don't have to go to pain compliance, especially on a child. There's other things out there.
We requested the protocol for using the pepper ball launchers from the Texas Military Department. We have yet to get a response. We did speak with Dr. Rohini Har, who's a medical advisor for Physicians for Human Rights and has done research on the use of tools like this pepper ball launcher.
There's really no role for projectiles in policing crowds. They cause too much damage. They cannot be used discriminately against an individual who's causing harm, and they're just too dangerous, especially against unarmed civilians.
And it seems like the Texas Military Department and DPS agree.
We specifically trained them, do not shoot directly at an individual.
Dr. Hard tells us in U.S. policing, they typically reserve the use of force, like pepper balls, for issues where there is a real threat, not migrants standing in water on the other side of the wire.
In that video, there's really no threat to anyone's safety and need to use these weapons at all. And then on top of that, the children are right on the front of some of these women. And so they are more at risk of getting hit. And I really worried about what would happen if those kids did get hit.
The next day after my story aired, I received an email responding to my request for information that read as followed. Quote, Operation Lone Star has well-established rules for the use of force, policy, and training to include quarterly refresher training. Rubber bullets and tear gas are not issued systems for Operation Lone Star. That came from the Texas Military Department Public Affairs Office in Camp Mabry, Austin, Texas. To that, I replied and said, good morning, I appreciate the response, but it doesn't answer our question. Your statement affirms there is training and negates the use of rubber bullets and tear gas. I asked about the pepper ball launcher on your YouTube channel and in videos we use from Eagle Pass. I am still waiting for a response. Also on the 26th, my colleague Jordan Elder did a follow-up to those big red buoys that cover about 1,000-foot stretch in Eagle Pass just across Heavenly Farms, a pecan farm owned by Hugo and Magali Urbina. Just a week before this story was filed, more buoys were installed, but later could not be found. The buoys are about 4 feet around, and the ones initially installed last year now sit in mud since the river's flow has changed since they were installed. We have watched migrants jump on them and walk on top of them, making fun of them. But as Jordan Elder was able to uncover through her investigation, Texas officials confirmed that the new buoys placed in the Rio Grande were taken out of the water just after a national network crew did a story on the installation of more buoys in Eagle Pass. But why? Here's Jordan Elder.
They're meant to stop the flow, bought with $1 million of your dollars. But where are the new buoys? And why are the old ones sitting in mud?
And the longer the stretch of buoys, the more significant that impact is going to be.
Governor Greg Abbott making a big announcement last week.
We're going to be putting more buoys into the Rio Grande River, doing more to deny illegal entry into the state of Texas.
Sharing these images of new buoys being lowered into the Rio Grande. But when our chopper flew over the river Friday, there was no sign of them. Several sources telling us the state dropped them into the water and then took them back out. We asked the governor's office when and why this happened, but got no response. Dr. Adriana Martinez is a river scientist at Southern Illinois University Edwardsville. Her ties to this river go back decades.
This is the river I grew up on. This is the river that everyone in town grew up on. And we value that resource.
She didn't spot any new buoys while she was on the Rio Grande either. Martinez was back in the water studying how the original barrier is impacting the environment.
But eventually we will get a shallower area there that is able to sustain vegetation, turning that area into an island.
This is what the buoys looked like when she took samples in July. Grass and plants entangled in the barrier. After heavy rains, the river flow washed a lot of that away. But new plants and trees are already growing. The gates, meant to be underneath the barrier, are also sticking up in some places. Texas taxpayers likely to foot the bill to fix that.
They're just going to end up spending more and more money to maintain the buoys when they're really not deterring undocumented immigration in the first place.
Governor Greg Abbott sees it differently. His office telling us in a statement last week that the buoys have been very effective and courts have ruled Texas has the right to deploy them, again saying that more are on the way.
There's got to be better ways that don't do damage to the river and don't cost as much money.
Martinez is taking more samples back to Illinois and measuring how water is flowing on the U.S. and Mexican sides of the river. She hopes the state of Texas is doing tests like that too. As for that new installation of buoys, Governor Abbott has said he wants to double the amount of barrier that's currently in the water. He has not released details, though, on how much that will cost and if a barrier like this could be expanded beyond Eagle Pass to other parts of the Texas border. Reporting in Eagle Pass, I'm Jordan Elder.
The next day, we received this statement from a spokesperson for the governor's office. Quote, new floating marine barriers were deployed in Eagle Pass last week before construction issues arose with the anchoring system. Additional materials are now on the way, and the floating marine barriers will be expanded upon delivery. That's according to Andrew Mahalaris. Jordan sent follow-up questions to the governor's communication personnel about how long the buoys were in the water, where will the barrier be expanded, and more details on the future installations. We have yet to hear back from the governor's office about this. In the coming weeks, as the country and the new administration prepare for the inauguration of President Trump, we will wait to see who will be expelled or deported from the U.S. Will mass deportations include those who have lived here since they were children, or will they target initially those who have orders for deportation and criminals like Tren de Aragua, the transnational criminal organization from Venezuela that has started havoc now in the U.S. The key word we keep hearing is people who have orders for removal. That is all for this week and another edition of Immigration Crisis, the fight for the southern border in San Antonio, Texas. For Sinclair Broadcasting, I am Jami Virgin reporting. Until next time.